Okay, so I'm going to be making a console table for a customer. The dimensions are going to be 40 inches long by 17 inches wide and 30 inches high. It's going to be made out of all pine. Some of it's going to be some framing lumber, some 2x3, which I'm cutting up here. And the rest will be 1 by and 5/4 by 12 that I'll rip down to size for the top. And yeah, and I'll also use 5/4 for the upside down V's, and it's a couple other trim pieces for the brackets to hold the bottom shelves in, and really just minimal tools for the most part. But even though most steps will start at the miter saw here, as you can see, and we'll just cut everything to length for the legs and frame. So next I go to the jointer, and here I'm just trying to get one flat face and one flat end before I run it through the planer. So you see I'm running through the jointer still, and then the next will be the planer. And this is kind of repetitive steps. You'll see I'll be doing the steps over again with the top and bottom pieces, and even the upside down V pieces, trim pieces. We run through the same steps. So it's pretty much cut the length, trim, table saw if I need be, jointer, planer, sanding. So here I'm just labeling my frame pieces, and this is just how I'm going to lay it out. You know, what piece I want to be the top, bottom pieces, sides, you know, exposed, and interior pieces. Okay, so here I am going to use pocket screws. I was going to use dowels for this project, but the dowels I have are 10 millimeters, and I just didn't trust them holding something the size of a console table in place. So I just wasn't really comfortable with using the dowels and glue. So I'm just going to use glue and pocket screws for this. And it's just the quickest and probably the best joinery for this type of table, in my opinion, you know, besides Domino's. So now I'm going to use a table saw to put the groove in for the tabletop fasteners here. As you can see, I'm going to set the blade to the height of the fastener, and I use my square tool to speed square here to set the fence to the, I think it's 6/16 of an inch, and you could also use a biscuit joiner or a router to achieve this. This just prevents wood movement on the tabletop, you know, with weather changes and humidity. So here I'm going to run the frame top piece through the blade. Now you have to be very careful here with this type of cut, so I kind of like just lower the wood onto the blade, a moving blade, and sometimes I'll just shut this table saw off to finish the cut. So you have to be really careful if you can kick back on you. This is a dangerous cut. I don't really like doing this. So yeah, it's just quickest and easiest. So next step here, I just run each frame piece edge through the router table. You can also use the trim router, which I do sometimes, but this is just set up and it's faster. I think it's a little safer too. Just run it through, and it's pretty easy. I just put a little chamfer on each edge of each frame piece. Now everyone's favorite part, sanding, and you'll see these steps a lot of sanding with each one of my projects. Okay, so now all my frame pieces are cut to length, milled through the planer and joiner, tabletop groove, cut in the top frames, ran through the router table for chamfered edges, and also sanded. So now these are ready for assembly. So I'm going to use pocket screws, and I'm going to use 2-inch pocket screws for these since it's a little bit of a bigger table with some glue. And I use squares to make sure everything's square, and also use little spacers to have a reveal, as you'll see at the end. And even the first pictures, you see I like to have a reveal. So I put the end pieces together first, and then I put the front and backs, the longer stretcher pieces, because it's easier for me to assemble that this way. And like I said, I'm just using glue, pocket screws, 2-inch pocket screws. squares, spaces for the reveal, clamps. I'm using some parallel clamps for the longer pieces here, and also will clamp to the table, especially if I see any like wobble or something's not flush. So this is really just repetitive steps, and as you can see, I don't have a fancy shop. I don't have the fanciest tools. Everything is, bought with profits what I make. So it's a no frills shop, and I take pride in that. So, but I also take pride in what I do. I don't try to send any junk out. I make sure everything's square and assembled, sturdy, and for the price, make sure that the customer's happy. And that's most of my customers are repeat customers, which is a good thing. So we're busy, and like I said, everything in this shop is bought from profits. And I started out just with a circular saw and a little cheap DeWalt drill, and that was really about it. And some glue and screws. So now we're building up, and we're getting busy. And as you can see, it's a small shop, so hopefully we'll expand eventually and keep everything clean, get a better dust collection. But this table's going together nice. So here I'm just cutting little bracket pieces for the bottom shelf. So what I do, I just cut, I think they're about 12 inches long, and I put one on each end, and I just glue and brad nail into the bottom frame pieces. And these will hold the bottom shelves. It's also very cold. It's about 19 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm bundled up, as you can see here. Also, another tip, even for my bottom legs or bottom stretcher piece, and these, I have spacer pieces I have for my default builds. So it's good to have these. It's a good tip to have, is have spacers and jigs handy and available so it makes your builds a lot easier and more repetitive. Here I'm just measuring for the center of the back and also the sides for my upside down V's. But first I'm going to cut my top pieces, and this is 5/4 pine, and I'm cutting this first for the top because then I'm going to trim off. These are going to be 17 inches wide, so they're going to be about 8.5 inches. So the extra slat or extra wood is going to be used for the upside down V's. So the extra leftover cutoffs will be used for those trim pieces. So since that way everything stays consistent and in the same type of wood, and this 5/4 is pretty nice for the most part, and it's pretty expensive, probably more than my maple I get from the Amish. So it's pretty expensive from the lumber yard. So now you can see I'm just cutting the top pieces to final width, and I will run through the joiner too later to get a good glue joint. But this is just so I could get the upside down V pieces. There will be the leftover pieces from what's left over from the 8.5 inches from each piece of the 5/4. So like I said, it will keep the wood the same consistency and the same type of wood for the tops and the V's. So here I'm just going to cut the trim pieces for the upside down V's, as I call them. This is just the leftover cut-offs from the top. So this is just cutting the final width, and then we'll start milling this wood after the fact. So here I'm just getting the rough measurements for the back upside down V pieces, and also do the sides. So and also I'll use my my angle finder to get the angle. And I believe the ultimate angle for the backs was about 35 degrees, and the sides I believe was 12 degrees. After I measured everything out and got perfect cuts. So this is the next step. So now I'll start cutting these to the angle I need and start measuring them in place, and I'm going to glue and brad nail eventually. So ultimately, I'm just going to be sneaking up on each cut here to get the perfect space and the perfect dimensions for these cuts from on front, back, and sides. So it's not always the perfect in the first cut. So I'm just going to use the miter saw to get my cuts here. Now I will say, and this is, I should probably follow my own advice here. I should probably put like a fence on your miter saw here to get better cuts for these 35-degree cuts. And you'll see I don't know 35 degrees at first. I've kind of figured it out because I want to get a good space between the upside down V's so I could brad nail them in so they're not too flush together, but also that they're close enough that it looks good. So once I figure my final angle here, and this goes for the side pieces too, I just use the one piece as my template to cut the rest, and then we'll mill them. We'll run it through the planer, and sand them, as you'll see. Now that the frame is assembled, the top is cut, even though it's not set up yet, and the V's are on. Now I'm going to start cutting the bottom shelf pieces. And these are going to be, I believe, 6 inches wide for each piece, and I think they come out to about 33 inches long. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm just going to start the miter saw, and then we'll finish the milling process. Also, these are just 1x8 pieces of pine, and I will rip them down to 1x6s when it's all said and done. Maybe a little just under, like they'll be like 5s and 15 16s in width because I like to have a little space between the frames. Okay, as you see, the steps are kind of repetitive again. Like I said, cut the length, cut the width with the table saw, and depending on the wood, I'll join or plane, depending on how rough it is. But this is pretty straight. As you see here, I have a little bit of a mishap almost here. I have a little bit of a kickback due to me being lazy, because it's pine. I use it on an issue cutting, especially one by pine on the table saw. For some reason, I have a little bit of a kickback on this. So here I am just going to joint and plane not only the bottom pieces, but I also will do the top pieces too here now. So I'm getting it ready to start laminating the tops. So everything will run through the jointer and the planer after being cut to the width and length on the miter and table saws. So to laminate the tops, I'm just going to mark where I'm going to use the biscuit joiner here, and I'll use the biscuits and glue with parallel clamps. Okay, so while we wait for the top to laminate, we are going to prepare the frame now. So we're going to spray some primer, a very light coat of primer, and we will do like a very light sanding after that, and then we will paint the frame with a white paint primer mix. So right now I'm just going to do a very light coat of this primer, this Kills primer, and a very light sanding after that before we paint. Okay, I have one coat of light primer on here. I'm going to let this dry for a couple hours, then I'm going to come back out and do one more coat, and then tomorrow we'll paint. I have a couple other drawer end tables I got to paint too, white, so I'm going to primer them up also tonight, and then we'll finish up hopefully both orders tomorrow, or maybe 2-3 days to let everything dry. Still got to stain some stuff and everything. All right. So as you can see, I put a couple coats of primer on and did a very light sanding. Now we are painting with the paint primer mix, and we'll do 2 to 3 coats of that depending on how it lays on. And I even do a light sponge sanding between coats with this also. Okay, so now we're going to start finishing up this order with cleaning up the top. So we will start with sometimes I'll do a hand plane depending on how it looks, but right now we're going to start with just a sander here, and belt sander, and then we'll go to orbital sanders, and we'll sand up to about 220 grit. So typically for my tops, I have an order. So I will usually use a hand planer depending on the wood and also how it glues up. Then I'll run a belt sander with that 80 grit, and then I'll run an orbital sander with that 80 grit, which I'm doing here. Then we'll do a chamfer bit with a trim router, and then after that we will move on to higher grits of sanding. So we'll sand the edges here and get it like a nice smooth edge, and also we'll sand the whole top and bottom just to get it nice and cleaned up. Now it's time to stain. So a lot of times I'll put a little preconditioner on the tops to help from smearing and smudges, or linseed oil or mineral oil, depending on what I have, and then I'll load the stain. I'll just wipe it on with a cloth, and then wipe off the excess. Okay, so now I'll use my speed squares to line up the top with the frame, and this is after the stain has dried on the tops and bottoms. So I'll just use the tabletop fasteners with some self-tapping screws. Now, if I'm using hardwoods, I will pre-drill, but for this wood, I don't need to. And while the table is upside down on the top, I will also pre-drill holes on the bottom brackets to hold the bottom shelf pieces in. So while it's upside down, like I said, I'll pre-drill with countersink, and then when we put the table back over, we'll mount the bottom shelves. So you can see here, I'm going to put the bottom pieces in there, and they're snug, so I'm going to have to tap them in a little bit, which is fine. So the snugger they are, the better. Hold it in place when I screw them in for the final mount. Now it's just a matter of screwing in bottom pieces with 1.5 inch little trim screws. They're very thin diameter screws, and they work perfectly for these bottom shelves. Now it's time for finish. And these tables, I'm just going to put some polyurethane, 2 to 3 coats with the light sand between each coat. And it's really cold, so it's not laying on as well as I would like. So I meant to do 4 coats and do a real good sand in between each coat, since it's really cold out right now. It's about 19 degrees Fahrenheit. Even though I have a little heater on, it's really not laying as well as I would like. I'll do a couple coats of polyurethane, a couple sandings in between, and let it dry for a day or so, and it'll be ready to go out. Okay, so the table is done now. I have put about 4 coats of polyurethane on, and it's done. And anybody can build these tables. Just take some time, patience, and just being consistent. And thanks for watching. Hopefully this helps if you want to start building these tables.